So before I get started, I just want to acknowledge that we're meeting on the land, the traditional, ancestral, unceded territories of the First Nations, and in some cases, Native American peoples. So I know here where I'm logging in from now, I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. So I'm on the land of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. But I know some of you might be on the land of other nations.
Yeah.
So if you'd like, feel free to write those nation names in the chat. Or just if you don't know, you can look it up. It's always good for us to know the native lands that we're on. So thank you. And let's pray for the day in which we might be with our Indigenous sisters and brothers in right relationship. And so I'm Reverend Kathy Merchant. So like I said, I'm based here in Vancouver, BC. And I decided that I would be willing to do a presentation here because I'm an interfaith minister, ordained as an interfaith minister, and I lead a local interfaith congregation called the Living Interfaith Sanctuary. So my own background, like maybe some other spiritual seekers, I've kind of identified with different faith traditions over time. I started out in the Catholic tradition, and then in college, I started dating someone who was Jewish, and I started going to both synagogue and church for a while, and then I started studying Buddhism. And so I actually had a period of a few years where every Wednesday I would study Buddhism and I was part of a Dharma group and we'd meditate. And on Friday nights, I'd go to synagogue at a conservative synagogue. And then on Sundays, I'd go to Catholic Mass. And I thought that was a great way to be. And so I maintained that for a while. And then just over time, I ended up kind of feeling more strongly identified with the Buddhist tradition. So when I was in my early 20s, I took the 3 refuges in a Shambhala Buddhist center on the East Coast of the US. And so I've, strictly speaking, I've been Buddhist since then, but I married an Ismaili Muslim man from India. And now, very confusingly, I got ordained as an interfaith minister, and I'm currently the acting lead minister of Canadian Memorial United Church here in Vancouver. So my kids are very used to the fact that we meditate at home. We have a Buddhist shrine at home. And then on Friday nights, we go to the Ismaili Jamaat Khana, the Ismaili mosque. And then on Sunday mornings, they come with me to church. And so it's very good. So we raise our family. We have 2 kids who are 6 and 9, and we're raising them as kind of celebrating all the things. And we joke that eventually they're going to realize that not all families do that, but they haven't figured that out yet. So we'll keep it going as long as they'll put up with it. And so far it's good. So I've been interested in interfaith for a very long time. I used to work for the Compassionate Listening Project that I'll share a little bit more about in a little bit. And they're based in the Seattle, Washington area. And it was started by some American Jewish women who were interested in working with Palestinians. And so Alea Green is the founder of Compassionate Listening. And she had been living in Israel for a few years and had realized that she didn't know any Palestinians. And also that she had kind of this internal fear of Palestinians. And that wasn't in keeping with her values. She grew up in a very open home and really believed in making friendships and understanding and working with people from different backgrounds. But she didn't feel that she knew how to do that in Israel and Palestine. So she ended up meeting with the Quaker peace activist, Jean Knutson Hoffman. And Jean at that time was doing workshops about how do we listen to both the victims and the oppressors. And that was really revolutionary because it's understood, of course, you would want to listen to victims, but why would you also want to listen to people who were perpetrators? And so she was very interested in this and started working with Jean. And together they created the Compassionate Listening Project to bring Israelis and Palestinians together in dialogue, and how do they become friends with one another, listen to each other, and come to understand one another better. And so in 2008, I went on a delegation with them. They take groups of just regular citizens over to Israel and the West Bank. They used to go to Gaza when they had permission there, but otherwise they take them to Israel and the West Bank and travel around for a week or 2 and meet with equal numbers of Israelis and Palestinians and listen to their life stories and try to see what they can do to help them come to a place where the people will want to meet with each other. And so we did this trip back in 2008, and I was so moved by it. I found it so powerful. The first group we met with were from the Bereaved Parents Circle, and it was 2 fathers whose children had been killed in the conflict. And instead of using what had happened as a reason to hate one another, and isolate themselves more. They said, we don't want anyone else's children to be killed in the conflict. So we're united together. And they travel around, they said, we're brothers. And we want to teach everyone that they're brothers as well, brothers and sisters. And I was so moved by that. So I started working with them. And of course, in Israel and Palestine, all the kind of peace work that you do is naturally interfaith, because in order to bring people together from both sides, you have to bring together Jews and Muslims and Christians and Druze and Baha'is and people from all different backgrounds. And so eventually I would go on these trips in the Middle East. And then I was living in the Seattle area, and I met someone who became my mentor, my interfaith mentor eventually, Reverend Stephen Greenebaum. And so he is a Jewish gentleman, originally from California, and he's lived in Seattle for a very long time. And he had worked with Sheikh Jamal Rahman and some of the other interfaith amigos to create an interfaith congregation in the Seattle area. And so I met Stephen at a conference. I was presenting about compassionate listening in the Israel-Palestine conflict, and he was presenting on the idea of interfaith congregations. And he said, you know, originally he was a choir director in a Unitarian church, and he felt a calling, and he went to the Jesuit Catholic Seminary, Seattle University, and he met Sheikh Jamal there. And he just was so touched with Sheikh Jamal's work as part of the Interfaith Amigos, where it was three of them. They just recently switched, but it was Sheikh Jamal is from the Sufi Muslim tradition. Rabbi Tad Falcon is from the Jewish tradition, and Pastor Don McKenzie is from the Christian tradition. And they've been working together since 9/11, saying, how can we bring people from our backgrounds together in a peaceful way so we can understand each other? And so Stephen started working with Sheikh Jamal specifically at Jamal's congregation in Seattle. And that one is the Interfaith Community Sanctuary. So it's the first interfaith congregation in the Seattle area that I know about. I think it is the first one. And Stephen worked there as his assistant minister for a few years and said, you know, this idea of people coming together and worship from different backgrounds shouldn't be isolated to this one community. So Stephen created another interfaith congregation north of Seattle called the Living Interfaith Church. And so right when I met him was in 2010. And he was just starting that. So my family, I was very excited because my dad is still Catholic. My husband's Muslim, I'm Buddhist. And I was like, oh, here's a community. We can all come and worship together. This is great. This is just what we need. And so we joined in 2010. And so I worked with Stephen. So I attended there and was on the board. And in 2014, he said, you know, I wonder if you might have a calling as well, and if you might be interested in interfaith ministry. And I was. I meditated on it, and I was. So I ended up studying. I was Stephen's assistant minister for a few years in learning how do we do this? How do we bring people together across different faith traditions? And then in the 2016, unfortunately, with the rise of Donald Trump and more right-wing politics, there was a lot of anti-Muslim sentiment in the Seattle area. And at that point, I was pregnant with our second child. And I've been doing interfaith programming at the local mosque, the Muslim Association of Puget Sound, and they do a lot of work in interfaith. They're actually lovely. They have a lot of good connections with the other groups. And so I was going there to help create these programs. But there were so many threats against the mosque that we started having to have a permanent police presence there. So the sign outside was destroyed twice by people with sledgehammers. There was a brick thrown through the window. We'd be coming in on the weekend and there'd be people protesting outside, saying, you know, we don't want any Muslims here. And even at my husband's Ismaili Jamaat Khana, the only Jamaat Khana in Washington, there was someone driving around in a pickup truck and yelling at people before they were going in for Eid prayers in the morning. And so my husband and I got very worried about raising our children in this kind of environment. And so we talked about it and we said, well, if there's a way for us to move to Canada, the Vancouver area has a lot of Muslims, a lot of Ismaili Muslims in particular, and it might be a more hospitable place to raise a family. So I applied to the Vancouver School of Theology, which is a Christian seminary. And I said, I know this might be a long shot, but I've been doing this interfaith work for a while. And I was wondering if we could get an education visa and if I might be able to come there and study. I'll do a Master of Divinity program so I can get ordained officially. So I'll have the same degree as Christian ministers would have. But my own tradition, I practice Buddhism, and then I have this interfaith kind of work that I want to do. And I'd love to create another interfaith congregation so that there aren't just the two that I know about in the Seattle area, but then we can have one in Vancouver as well. And they actually accepted me. And so we moved here in 2017. Our son was 5 months old. I met one of my favorite professors while I was pumping breast milk in the student lounge. So it was a very young family. And I studied at VST for 5 years. And in order to do your Master of Divinity program, you have to do on the ground work in churches. And so my first year, I was just doing academic study. And they let me study not just Christianity. I studied a lot of Christianity, but also other faith traditions as well, and really open it up. And they helped me find lecturers in all different backgrounds so I could do some independent studies with them. And so I could write my papers and learn about all different kinds of traditions, even more than before, which was so lovely. And then my second year, they said, okay, you have to work in a church. But the person in charge of that program was very supportive. And she said, why don't you start your interfaith congregation now? You've already worked for 3 years as an assistant minister. I bet you could do it. So in 2018, I founded the Living Interfaith Sanctuary. And so here, I'm going to show you our web page. I'm going to screen share here. And so this is the Living Interfaith Sanctuary. So we started out meeting in a United Church. And so this is showing, during COVID, we had a switch to online, but we used to meet in the United Church. And so what we do is, so there I am. And what we do is we get together twice a month. Here you can see we've been meeting since 2018. So for several years now. I'm going to stop sharing for right now. And we get together twice a month on a Saturday morning, which I know isn't ideal for our Jewish friends, but the Jewish friends who join say that they go to synagogue on Friday nights then. So we wanted to find a time that was accessible for everyone to join. And we take turns focusing on different traditions. And then we have a couple rules. So one rule is we never preach about anyone else's tradition. So I use this wonderful resource created by the Multi-Faith Action Society. So this is the Multi-Faith calendar. I actually was on the board for 3 years and I used to help put this together. This is based in Vancouver as well. And so you see well, this one has too many of my notes in it. Some of these have a lot of notes. Here we go. So here in November, so you'll see that there are different symbols for the different days and they're color coded. And on the side, it'll say these are the holy days or special occasions in these different faith traditions. And so what my group does is at the start of every year, we have a big meeting. We have a board of 8 people. Steve Slocum, who's in the San Diego area, he's one of our advisors. So I've known him for several years now, and he's helped us with this. And people on our board come from all different backgrounds. And we say, okay, every major religion gets 2 services, up to 2 services devoted to them over the coming year. And so if we meet twice a month, we have 24 services to plan. And so we can do about 12 different religions over the course of the year. And so let's space them out so we don't have them near each other. So let's look through the calendar and figure out when are good times to meet. And people from those religions pick which occasions they want to honor in that coming year. So for instance, so I can go back now, screen share back on our webpage. And so we've been doing this for several years now. So our services. So if I go to this year, so you can see, so our first Buddhist service was the Mahayana New Year. And I was preaching on that day. And so the people who speak at the services, who do the sermon part of it, belong to those faith traditions. And so either they're in our community itself, or we reach out to other people we know from other faith communities and say, would one of you like to come celebrate with us on your special occasion? And so the next Buddhist service is going to be some other time this year, grounding ourselves on Bodhi Day. So we won't have another Buddhist service again until December. Our Christian services this year, let me see where they are. Here we go. Pentecost with Reverend Jermaine Lovelace, who is in Toronto. And then our next Christian service will be St. Francis and the Blessing of the Pets. And we'll have a different Christian speaker. So we celebrate about 12 different religions over the course of the year. And we try to get different speakers for each of the traditions and for each service. And then the way it goes is we used to meet in person. So we had fewer people. We could kind of choose to lead, although we made really good connections with the other folks in the lower mainland of BC. As it is now, we can reach out to people online and say, would you like to join us? I know you have this special occasion coming up. And so over time, we've developed relationships with dozens and dozens of religious leaders all over, which has been so lovely. And then usually I lead the service part with our musicians, and we pick all the prayers, and the music we pick is geared to that same tradition. So our musicians are really wonderful. They are from the United Church, so they're Christian, but actually it's a married couple, and the man is also part of a Punjabi band. And so he's worked a lot with people in the South Asian community. And so they try to be as authentic as they can in showcasing music from different traditions. And sometimes we'll get people from other backgrounds as well to do the music. And then I'll pick prayers from those traditions geared to that. And I'll clear those with the speaker. So we want to make sure it's as respectful as possible. And then we have about an hour-long service that would go the way you'd imagine a Christian or a Jewish service might go. But then all the components of it are geared to that specific faith tradition that week. And then when it's time for the sermon, I introduce the person and then they speak. And we record the whole service and we put it online. So I can also show you our YouTube channel has more than 100 videos now of people speaking about their faith traditions. And so that way, even if people can't come to a given service, at least then they can learn about them later. And so we have, so let's see. So yeah, we just celebrated Lamas from the Wiccan tradition this past weekend. Our service before that was from Muharram. In Islam, we had a LGBTQ affirming service in honor of Canada Day, actually. So this person who was speaking, Bob Peacock, he was a queer member of the Canadian Navy who had been kicked out for being queer and shared about his story. And so it goes back. So we have more than 100 videos of people speaking about their backgrounds and their traditions. And that way, some of the videos only get maybe like 15 views and others get 200 views. And that way, if anyone, sometimes we'll have someone write to us and say, I'd love to learn more about Wicca or about Zoroastrianism or about the Sikh tradition. And I'll say, okay, here are all the people I know in that tradition. These are the people I know who are willing to speak in interfaith contexts. Here are some of the videos if you want to learn. So what can we do to kind of gather the knowledge and then share it in much the way that you all are doing here for Interfaith Awareness Week? So that's what we've been doing for the last 5 years now. And it's been lovely. So in our community itself, we have about 35 members, come from 9 different religions. And we, at a given service, we have 20 to 25 people. So, you know, sometimes people are traveling or whatever, but about 20 to 25 people. And then our views online later, people will say, well, I can't come, but I love watching them later. So yes, so that's the primary thing that we do here at the Living Interfaith Sanctuary. In addition to our services, over time, we've done various other things. Here, so every year, our biggest event is we hold an annual Interfaith Passover Seder. It's partly my own work, even though I had never been officially Jewish. I did go to synagogue for a few years, and then my mentor is Jewish, and I worked in Israel for several years. And so my favorite holiday is Passover. And I love, because Passover is all about liberation, and the Jews I've worked with have done Passover in such a beautiful, open-hearted way. Being able to create these events where you bring Jewish people and Christians and Muslims together and people from other traditions to celebrate Passover and learn Passover together has been so lovely. So this last year, we had a big Passover Seder with 2 churches and a big Jewish group here in Vancouver. And we had, I think it was 130 people come out for it. So it was a lot of planning. There's a lot of food and it was very involved. But it's wonderful. And that's our biggest event of the year. So we do that every year here in Vancouver. And then we also, when we can, we try to visit. So since COVID, we meet online, but we also try to visit other faith places. So we visited a synagogue together, a Shia Muslim mosque in the Richmond area here. And last year we went to a Sikh Gurdwara. We had about 50 people visit the Gurdwara and take part in a service there and have a Longar lunch, which is a big free open lunch. Mm-hmm. And it's really lovely. So, and we're hoping now that we're hopefully past COVID that we can do more of that, actually going and meeting people in person as well and not just online. We always host a monthly study series. It's led by this wonderful local Baha'i teacher, Harold Rosen. And so in the last 3 years, he focuses, so we meet every month, focused on a different topic. So a few years ago, we were studying different religious scriptures. So every month we would meet and learn about scriptures from a different faith tradition. So over the course of the year, 12 different religions, 12 different kind of bodies of scripture. The following year, it was women mystics from across the ages. It was fantastic. We record all of these. These are also on our website. I can quickly show you where, and they're also on our YouTube channel. So these are fantastic. So again, on the website, Women Mystic series, he did an afterlife series this past year. And so you can see we record all of the sessions. And so about these specific women mystics, it was very popular. He's a fantastic teacher. This last year, we did an afterlife study series. So focusing on beliefs about the afterlife in different traditions. And he said the next one he's hoping to do is about comparative prophecy, about the future. And so he's probably the most knowledgeable person that I know about religions, like in the most widespread way possible. So having him join us and teach us is really fantastic. We also held a monthly meditation group for a year, someone in the Sikh community who would share and teach us different meditations. Unfortunately, she hasn't done that in a couple of years because she's been busy with other stuff, but we'd love to get that started again. And then I also still teach compassionate listening. So I'm a certified compassionate listening instructor. And so I actually combined the compassionate listening training with insights from different traditions. So I can quickly show you. So now when I teach it, I actually do it in an explicitly interfaith way. So I teach it as a 10-week series. This is like the introductory compassionate listening training. There are advanced trainings that I'm not certified to teach yet, but I combined 10 different faith traditions and some of the insights and practices from them with different aspects of compassionate listening. And so starting with in the indigenous traditions, so being with the self in presence. So really, how do you ground yourself when you're around and in the presence of the other? From Judaism, how do we work with our triggers? And that was coming out of insights working in Israel and Palestine. So practices in Judaism that can help you kind of regulate yourself again once you've been triggered or have had some kind of trauma. From my own Buddhist tradition, how do we work to get out of a drama triangle into an empowerment triangle where we have respect for all beings in a given conflict? From Christianity, the concept of 3-part listening. So when we listen to others, how do we listen not just for the facts that they're sharing, but also the feelings and the values behind where they're coming from, with the understanding that then we can really understand each other more. From the Sikh tradition, the idea of deepening inquiry. So when someone has shared their story, how can we help them go deeper into the practice as a kind of seva, which is like a kind of charity practice in the Sikh tradition. So helping someone go deeper into the story to work through something. From Hinduism, the idea of the truth box. So Hindus are often very good at understanding things in a really non-dualistic way. So if you have groups in conflict, how can we use Hindu teachings to understand that it isn't just that one side is completely right and the other side is completely wrong, but things can be really multifaceted and we can have respect and understanding for a lot of different viewpoints. From Wicca or a neo-pagan tradition, how do we use kind of the grounding practices in that to help us connect more to others who are coming from a different background? From the Baha'i faith, widening circles. So if I'm kind of stuck in one understanding of the people I'm in conflict with, how can I come back and understand them now in a newer way? So not just my own story about the conflict, but also their perspective and seeing things in a bigger and bigger way. From humanism, so understanding more of the scientific principles and kind of what's going on in your body and in your mind and neurologically in your brain when we're practicing compassion. So using more of the science behind compassion. And finally, from Islam, how do we move from debate to speaking from the heart? So not just listening to those we're in conflict with, but how can we really open it up in this beautiful kind of, just beautiful, soulful way of how do we also speak and share our own perspectives on things, but in a way that isn't just going to attack or automatically push others away, but really invite them to be a part of the whole with us. So this is now a 10-week series that we teach out of the Living Interfaith Sanctuary using compassionate listening. So we do that. And then finally, I guess I have two more big things to share, and then I'll open it up for questions. When I was in seminary here at the Vancouver School of Theology, I got to study under Reverend Dr. Janet Geer, and she is Christian from the United Church tradition. But she has studied this idea that when people, even if you're in one particular religion, you might not practice that religion in the same way. So even in a given faith community, often people express their faith or practice their faith in different ways. And so she studies this idea. So here are a few ways that people practice their religions. So one is for those for whom worship is the most important. So kind of coming, once a week and being a part of the worship service, that's where they find transcendence, is in the worship. Versus those for whom community events, kind of community dinners and luncheons and just being a part of the community and the more pastoral care kind of thing, where that's really the centerpiece for them of the practice. There are those for whom intellectual study is very, very important, like Bible study, scripture study, reading lots of books, having debates. The intellectual side of the tradition is very important for them. Those for whom meditation or contemplation is the main way that they practice. So often, going in a lot of silence, a lot of the contemplative practices. Nature is also kind of either one of those or outside of it, depending on how you see that. We're really, no matter what tradition they have, really being out in nature is the area where they feel the closest to God or to divine. And then finally, those for whom activism is kind of the core, like practicing. How do you practice your faith? An engaged Buddhist or engaged whatever kind of practice. And so for her, she's using that in different United Church communities to make sure that you're supporting all those different ways of being Christian. But I see that as so useful in interfaith discussion as well, that if we kind of say, okay, well, interfaith is just this one thing, then we're not inviting those for whom they practice in different ways. So here are a few ways that those can look in an interfaith way. So for worship, our interfaith services, either like we do at the sanctuary, where we're our own congregation that does interfaith worship, or you can just have it another faith community where they say, this week we're going to invite someone from this other tradition to come speak, or we're going to do prayers or songs. So, but you can do worship in an interfaith way as well. Also, obviously, community dinners. It's easy to have interfaith dinners or picnics or gatherings, places where people can really get to know each other and become friends. That's really important for everybody, but especially if you're more community-minded in that way. Intellectual study can look like interfaith panel discussions and comparative religious study, and the kind of work like Harold Rosen does, and just any, how do we have dialogues? How do we have these kind of things? It's very popular in interfaith and very helpful for the more intellectually minded folks. Meditation or contemplation is one of the easiest ways to bring people together. So you can have retreats, workshops, holding different kinds of meditation series where you're exploring different practices together, reading mystical poems or texts together. I used to, in Seattle, there's a Sufi Muslim teacher, Sanaa Joy Carey, who does interfaith Lectio Divina. So she'll bring people from different religions together, and then she'll say, okay, this week we're going to read about justice. And she'll take passages from different sacred texts across different religions that are all geared to justice, and say, okay, let's read through these, and now we're going to meditate. So we're going to read this one, and then we're going to meditate for 5 minutes, and read this one and meditate for 5 minutes. And she'll do this in a big group, and then afterwards we can have a big discussion across our different faiths of what came up for us when we were reading and meditating in that way together. And finally, activism. It's very easy and also really, I think, naturally inspiring to do activist projects in an interfaith way. So I know here in Vancouver, Guru Nanak's Free Kitchen is a Sikh-based group, but it's open to people from all over who work a lot with the homeless and people in the downtown east side, which is kind of a rough neighborhood here in Vancouver, and handing out food, making food and handing out food to those who need it. So it's a SIG project, but it actually has people from all religions that come together to work with the homeless in that way. I know in Seattle, there's an interfaith group that does Habitat for Humanity, of building houses together. You can pick up trash together, planting trees. I've worked with groups making care packages for people in women's shelters, protesting together, having big kind of gatherings or rallies together. So those are already really inspiring, but especially if you kind of open them up and do them in an interfaith way, I think it makes it that much more beautiful, you know. I have a document that we've put together over time about working with people from different faith traditions. I often share this in workshops, and I'm happy to share it. And I always kind of update it if it has some information that people say, well, that's not quite accurate. But just making sure when we're reaching out to people from other faith communities that we're doing so in a really respectful way. So there's a lot of information, but it's really, you know, making sure if you're working with Indigenous people, doing a land acknowledgement, honoring the elders, not practicing cultural appropriation or any kind of tokenism. You kind of say, well, I invited one Indigenous person, so therefore, you know, I'm totally in right relationship with the Indigenous community. Working with folks from a Hindu background, don't assume that you know everything about how they practice, either in their community or in their own family. Also making sure that you have vegetarian options available, and just being aware of some of the political situations going on in the Southeast, so that you're respectful of everyone when you're planning events. In Judaism, making sure that you're holding events at a time that will work for Jewish people, so not on Shabbat, and also, you know, not on important holy days, making sure that the foods and drinks you offer are kosher and available, and also being very respectful about any topics that come up that could touch on anti-Semitism or the state of Israel and Palestine. With Buddhism, also making sure you have vegetarian options available, not assuming that if someone's Buddhist that they can't also practice other things, or that Buddhism has to look one particular way. Buddhism is really open in a lot of ways. And also the same where there are folks, Buddhist communities, more focused on kind of the activist, engaged Buddhist practice versus a more contemplative practice, and just having some awareness about that can be helpful. In Christianity, not assuming that because someone's Christian that you think you know everything about how they practice or what they think politically or anything like that. There's a wide variety. It's quite open. Also making sure that, you know, if there are other groups that might have problems with Christians, that you're equally respectful of everyone, and that you're not inviting other speakers that might seem to be open to everybody except Christians, but making sure that it's really open across the board and everyone's equally honoring of each other. For Islam, definitely being aware of Islamophobia, some of the stereotypes we might have about each other. If you have events, making sure you have halal, or at the least kosher food and no alcohol. And also some awareness about different groups in Islam and some of their dynamics with each other. So you don't invite someone who claims to speak for all Muslims in a way that's not going to be very helpful. And the Sikh community is very, very open and often very involved in interfaith. Definitely like the kind of langars, like I mentioned before, about the big community wide, the big community kitchen and the meals. It's a wonderful place to have interfaith events. And also understanding some differences between the Sikh tradition and Islam, because sometimes outsiders get confused because Sikh men often wear turbans, and people can think, okay, they're Muslim, and then having ideas about that. So some awareness of the differences is helpful. With the Baha'i faith, they're very, very involved in interfaith and are so lovely, but they don't practice in the same way. They usually meet in individual homes rather than going to one particular place, and often study together as a group. And also some awareness about the dynamics between folks from the Baha'i faith and people in Iran or Muslims in general, because the Baha'is aren't fully accepted or safe in Iran, unfortunately. With Wicca, some understanding of it as a natural, like a nature-based faith tradition, and having nothing to do with Satanism, and being aware there might be some other groups that have like wrong ideas about what Wicca is, what neo-paganism is. So making sure that people are aware of this going in, and that Wiccas feel safe and know that they're not going to be automatically judged or spoken to in a derogatory way. And it's very helpful to kind of plan stuff around nature festivals. We found, because then people can kind of understand that, even if they don't come from a Wiccan background. And finally, Unitarian Universalism originally came out of liberal Christianity, but it's not the same as Christianity now. So it has some of its own dynamics. So don't assume that all UU folks are Christian, but also there might be some back and forth, slight disrespect between Christianity and UU, and making sure that everyone feels equally welcome there. So those are just a few of the tips I found over time. And finally, I just want to share, this is about 5 minutes. This is a sermon I gave a couple years ago, back when the sanctuary met in person. And it uses an image from Buddhism that I really like about the raft. And I just felt like it kind of summarizes a bit of what we hope to do in interfaith, like in our interfaith worship. So I'm just going to share this. Here, let me get this together. And I'm going to share this. And then I'll open it up for questions. Let me know with a thumbs up if you can hear it once I start the sound.
Listening, you'll just switch. And it's interesting with traditions, because that's actually not at all the point of what we're doing here. I don't hang out with folks from different traditions because I want to convert to those traditions, much to everyone's confusion, apparently. And it's also not because I'm secretly in my head saying, oh, well, that's stupid. You know, my tradition, we do that better. I don't know why you do it that way. It's not this kind of silent judging thing. It's this kind of openness and this belief that we can really connect with each other and we can learn from each other. And that's where I think for me, I love interfaith because I love people. I deeply love people, and I think that our spiritual practices and our beliefs, those are so much a part of who we are, that if we never learn from other people what it is they believe and what it is they do, we'll never really get those people. We won't understand them. And then if we say, well, I want to hang out with them, but I don't want to do it in any kind of religious way, then we're going to walk around with these ideas that all Buddhists are nihilists, or all Muslim men are misogynists, or all Christians believe in this triumphalism, that like, well, we won and we're superior. The Christians I know don't believe that. The Muslim men I know are not misogynists, but people think that because they don't actually hang out with them. And if they do hang out with them, they don't talk about religion, because they have these kind of fears. And I think in Buddhism there's this analogy, there's this saying, and it gets used in lots of different ways, all of which I love, but it's the raft is not the shore. And so one of those ideas is it's like the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings, are a raft. And the point is not to get to know the raft and to know everything about the raft. The point is to ride on the raft and get over the water and get to the other shore. So that if you do it right, once you get to the other shore, which is this kind of enlightenment space, this tremendous peace, this God space, once you get there, you let go of the raft. Because if you're so attached to the raft, then you get there and you're trying to drag the raft around with you on the beach or through the woods on the other side, and you can't actually get anywhere. Then you care more about the raft than the shore. And that can be used in so many ways. But I think that for me, what I really want is I see interfaith as this wonderfully scrappy flotilla of people with different kinds of boats, all trying to get to the shore. And we might think the shore is different. Like some of us might say, you know, I really want to get to the island on the other side, and that island is God, and that's my goal. And someone else might say, you know, I'm pretty sure that's not an island. I heard there are beaches over there. And someone else is like, no, I think it's rocky. You're like, you know what? That's fine, because we're not even over there yet. But instead of having that argument, then how about we go together? And then we all have these different kinds of boats. So if Buddhism has a raft, I just love this idea. I wish I could draw. Maybe we should ask Marcus to do this. If you have like a raft and it's linked up with somebody in a kayak, and somebody's in a bathtub, and they're like, I don't even need any of these fancy boats, I'm just gonna get over there myself. And somebody's like, no, I'm gonna swim as far as I can. And you might have a huge cruise ship that will say, well, look, we'll go so much faster. But it won't go so much faster if you have to go around other islands to get there. You're gonna get stuck, and you're gonna need the help of the bathtub and of the raft. And of all these, you got like a little yacht, and you have all these things. So instead of spending all the time on this side, saying, well, no, I know for certain that it's rocky over there, or it's an island over there, that isn't that useful. And then instead of trying to sink each other's boats, which I think is what a lot of us do, we can actually work together. And then I just love this idea that we can link up, and we can say, you know what, your cruise ship is magnificent. tell me all about it. I want to, while we're all strapped together, I'm going to get out of my raft and I'm going to climb on your cruise ship. And I'm going to figure out, you have all these cool things, I could learn from this. I bet I could apply this thing to my little raft, and then I can come back to my raft and I can actually use that. I don't have to say my raft is better. There's nothing I can learn from your cruise ship. But the fun is that we do it together. And that's really what I want us to do now. And that's what I see us doing here. This isn't a new fangled boat that looks different from all the other boats. This is we're all tied together. And I think we need that, because that's the only way that we're actually going to get there with the state of the world being what it is. So I just hope we feel that. I hope that we're open to that. We don't have that fear that if you ever step off your boat, then you can't possibly go back to your boat. The goal is not to actually leave the boat. The goal is to have fun with your friends while we try to get to the shore. And once we're on the shore, we can figure out who was right, or maybe it's a totally different thing. Maybe the earth really is flat. And we're just all going to go off, but I'd rather go off together than by myself on my raft. So thank you.
So thank you so much.